Chapter 1. The wrong birthday. Ryan Wilson had never been particularly fond of surprises. It wasn't that he disliked joy, he just preferred when it announced itself properly, like a guest knocking at the door instead of climbing through a window. So when the lights snapped on and a chorus of voices shouted "Happy Birthday," his entire body lifted a good inch off the ground in alarm before settling into a startled grin. There, in the center of Carol's living room, stood 12 of their closest friends, all smiling, laughing, and watching him as if his reaction had been the highlight of the evening, which, judging by their laughter, it clearly had. "Yeah, okay, that's fair," Ryan said, pressing a hand to his chest. "I walked right into that." Carol pushed through the group toward him, glowing with a kind of happiness that made everything else in the room blur slightly at the edges. She wrapped her arms around him and kissed his cheek. "Happy birthday," she said, her voice warm and proud. There was something about the way she said it, soft, almost relieved, that made him pause. "Thank you," he replied automatically. It took 3 full seconds for his brain to catch up. "Birthday." He blinked once, slowly. "Wait," he thought, not aloud, because there were already hands clapping his shoulders and voices chiming in and someone pressing a drink into his hand. "No, that's not right." He didn't say anything. Not because he was confused, though he was, but because Carol was looking at him like she had just pulled off something monumental, something she'd been planning for weeks, maybe months. The decorations were subtle but deliberate, small gold lights strung along the wall, a neatly arranged table with what looked like entirely home-cooked food, and a cake that had his name written across it in careful, slightly uneven icing. Ryan. He glanced at it, then at Carol, who was busy greeting someone else, her expression bright and animated. She looked happy. More than happy, accomplished. Ryan lifted his glass slightly in a small, private toast to his own confusion and decided, for the moment, to let reality catch up later. 3 months early, he thought. That's impressive commitment. The evening unfolded at a speed that didn't quite allow for overthinking. Conversation layered over conversation. Laughter surged and dipped, and Ryan found himself drifting into the rhythm of the party, as though he'd been expecting it all along. He told stories. He listened to jokes. He accepted hugs and accepted compliments that felt a little out of place but still pleasant. At one point, his friend Marcus clapped him on the back and said, "32 looks good on you, man." Ryan hesitated just long enough for Marcus to squint at him. Then he smiled. "Yeah," Ryan said. "Feels about right." It did feel about right. That part, at least, was accurate. Across the room, Carol caught his eye and smiled. It was quick, but it lingered just enough for something soft to settle in his chest. He loved her. That fact remained steady, even as the rest of the evening drifted slightly off axis. Dinner was thoughtfully prepared. His favorite dishes, he noticed, though he hadn't mentioned some of them in a long time. That detail nudged gently at his earlier confusion. She remembers this, he thought. But not the date? The thought wasn't sharp. Not yet, just curious. When they finally gathered around the cake, the room filled again with voices, louder this time, less coordinated. "Happy birthday to you," Ryan leaned slightly toward Carol. "Should I make a wish?" he murmured. She laughed. "Obviously." He looked at the candles, 32 small flames flickering together, and then at her. "I already have one," he said, just loud enough for her to hear. Her expression softened, and for a moment, everything felt exactly right again. He blew out the candles. The rest of the night blurred into warmth. Someone spilled wine. Someone told an unnecessarily dramatic story. At least 2 people argued about where to order late-night food until Carol stepped in and reminded them there was already dessert. Ryan laughed. He meant it each time. But beneath it, something quiet remained, like a note played just slightly off-key. By the time the last guest left, the apartment looked like the aftermath of a small, happy storm. Plates stacked unevenly in the sink, empty glasses on nearly every surface, and a faint trace of music still echoing in the walls. Carol leaned against the counter, letting out a long breath. "That went really well," she said, smiling to herself. "It did," Ryan agreed. He began gathering plates, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent enough time in this kitchen to know exactly where everything belonged. For a while, neither of them said much. The quiet felt natural, a gentle come-down from the noise. But Carol kept glancing over at him. "You're quiet," she said finally. Ryan set a plate down carefully in the sink and rinsed his hands. He dried them slowly, buying himself a few extra seconds. "Car," he said, turning toward her. Something in his tone made her straighten slightly. "Yeah." He studied her face, not searching for something, exactly. More like confirming something he hadn't fully named yet. "Whose birthday did we celebrate tonight?" The question hung in the air longer than it should have. Carol blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said gently. "Whose birthday was it?" She let out a small, uncertain laugh. "Yours. You were there." "I was," he said. "I noticed that." She frowned, the humor slipping away. "Ryan, what's going on?" He held her gaze steady. "My birthday is in October." The words landed softly, but the effect was immediate. Carol's expression froze, then shifted. Confusion, disbelief, and then something sharper underneath both. "No," she said quietly. That's not right." She reached for her phone, her movements quick and slightly uncoordinated. Ryan watched as she scrolled, her eyes moving rapidly. Then she stopped. The color drained from her face. "Oh," she whispered. On the screen, clear and unambiguous, was his contact. His name. His number. And beneath it, October. "That's not possible," she said again. But this time there was no conviction behind it. Ryan inhaled slowly. He wasn't angry. That surprised him a little. He was something else. He walked a small circle around the living room, his eyes scanning the space, not searching for anything in particular, just anchoring himself in the familiar. "I need some time," he said. Carol looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He turned back to her. "I'm not angry with you," he said. "I want you to know that." "Then don't say it like that," she replied, panic threading into her voice. "Don't make it sound like you're leaving." He hesitated. "I love you," he said, and the honesty of it seemed to steady him. "But I think you stopped seeing me a while ago." Her eyes widened. "That's not true." "I don't know that," he said gently. "That's the problem." She shook her head, stepping toward him. "It was a mistake. Just a stupid mistake." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it wasn't just one thing." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything earlier that night. "Why didn't you say anything?" she whispered. "At the party. Why did you just go along with it?" A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Because I love you too much to humiliate you in front of everyone we know," he said. Her breath caught. "It was obvious you worked really hard on tonight," he continued. "For whoever it was for." "It was for you," she said. But the words sounded uncertain now. "I hope so," he replied. "I really do." He reached for his jacket. "Ryan, I just need some space," he said, softer this time. She didn't stop him when he walked to the door. She just stood there, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding something together. At the threshold, he paused. "I want us to work," he said without turning around. "But I need to know I'm not just convenient." Then he stepped out into the hallway, the door closing quietly behind him. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't entirely sure where he stood. And that uncertainty followed him all the way home. Chapter 2. The silence between calls. Ryan didn't turn on the lights when he got back to his apartment. He stepped inside, closed the door quietly behind him, and let the dim glow from the hallway slip away as the latch clicked into place. For a moment, he just stood there, listening to the unfamiliar quiet. It wasn't really unfamiliar. It was his apartment, after all. He had lived here for years, but over the last 12 months, it had slowly shifted from home to something closer to storage with a bed. Now it felt still. He set his keys on the small table near the door and exhaled, the tension in his chest softening just enough to notice how tired he actually was. "Okay," he murmured to himself. "We're doing this." He loosened his jacket and draped it over the back of a chair instead of dropping it wherever it landed. A small act of intention that felt oddly significant. His phone buzzed. He didn't need to look at it to know who it was. Still, he did. Carol calling. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the answer button. It rang long enough that the vibration became background noise rather than interruption. "Not yet," he said quietly and let it go to voicemail. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Across town, Carol stood in the middle of her apartment, phone still pressed to her ear even after the call ended. "Pick up," she whispered, as though the words might reach him retroactively. The silence on the other end remained absolute. She lowered the phone slowly and looked around. The decorations were still up. The soft gold lights blinked faintly along the wall, cheerful and indifferent to the fact that the entire night had unraveled in the span of 3 sentences. Her gaze landed on the cake, half cut, Ryan's name smiling back at her in icing that suddenly felt like evidence. "I didn't forget his birthday," she said out loud, as if saying it firmly enough would make it true. "I know his birthday." But the phone in her hand told a different story. October, the same month it had always been. She pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead, trying to physically push away the rising pressure behind her eyes. "This doesn't make any sense." She opened her calendar app, flipping through the past few months as if the answer might be hiding somewhere between meetings and reminders. Rows of color-coded blocks filled her screen. Calls, deadlines, late nights that bled into early mornings. There were entire evenings marked simply as work, a placeholder that said nothing and everything at once. Her thumb paused. 3 weeks ago, final review prep. 2 weeks ago, revision round. Last week, late, don't schedule anything. She frowned. "I didn't even plan space for him," she murmured. The realization didn't land all at once. Seeped in, slow and persistent. She tried calling him again. It rang, and rang, then stopped. Ryan sat on the edge of his bed, phone in his hand this time as it lit up again. Carol calling. He sighed, running a hand over his face, and leaned back slightly. "She's going to keep calling," he said to the empty room. He didn't sound frustrated, just certain. The phone stopped, then buzzed again, this time with a message. Carol, Ryan, please talk to me. I don't understand how this happened. He stared at the screen for a long moment. You don't understand, he repeated quietly. He wasn't mocking her. If anything, there was a trace of sympathy in his voice. Yeah, he added. That's kind of the point. He set the phone down beside him and leaned back fully, staring up at the ceiling. The apartment creaked faintly. Small settling noises that he hadn't heard in months. His gaze drifted toward the corner of the room where a stack of unopened mail sat. Then to the bookshelf he hadn't touched in a year. Then to the chair that held exactly 2 shirts he clearly didn't wear anymore. I moved out without moving out, he said. The thought landed with surprising clarity. He hadn't just been staying at Carol's place more often. He had shifted. Gradually. Quietly. Little decisions, barely noticeable at the time. I'll just leave this here. I'll bring fewer things back and forth. It's easier if I stay tonight. It's easier if I stay most nights. At some point, most nights had become all of them, and he hadn't questioned it, because it had felt like progress, like closeness, like something building. He closed his eyes, replaying moments from the past few months, not searching for mistakes, but patterns. Carol on her laptop at midnight, barely looking up when he said goodnight. Carol apologizing for a late dinner, then checking her phone halfway through it. Carol saying, just one more week, more than once. He hadn't resented it. He had understood. She's working hard, he had told himself. It's temporary. But now he wasn't sure when temporary had turned into something else. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Carol, it was a mistake. There's no one else. Please don't think that. Ryan let out a breath, head tilting to the side. I don't think there's someone else, he said, almost answering her out loud. That part wasn't what had unsettled him. It was something quieter, harder to define. He picked up the phone and typed, then erased, then typed again. Finally, he set it back down without sending anything. Because I don't know what to say yet, he admitted. Carol sank onto the couch, her phone clutched tightly in both hands. The apartment felt wrong now, too bright in some places, too dim in others, too full of things that had felt right just hours earlier. Her gaze moved from object to object, each one pulling at a memory. The mug he always used, the towel he preferred, the pair of shoes by the door that he hadn't taken with him. He's been living here, she said quietly. Not as an observation, but as a realization she was only now fully confronting. Not visiting, not staying over sometimes, living. And she had what? She tried to answer that question and felt something tighten in her chest. I thought I was showing up, she whispered. Hadn't she? She had planned this party. She had invited their friends, cooked the dinner, remembered his favorite wine, even found that bakery he liked for the cake. I did all of that. But then her mind circled back to the simplest, most undeniable detail. She had gotten the date wrong. Not by a day. Not by a week. By 3 months. Carol let out a shaky laugh that didn't carry any humor. That's not just a mistake, she said. Couldn't be. Not that big. Not for someone she loved. Her phone remained quiet now. And somehow that was worse than the missed calls. Ryan eventually stood, the stillness becoming too heavy to sit in any longer. He moved through the apartment slowly, turning on a lamp in the living room, then another in the kitchen. The soft light filled the space in a way that felt patient. On the counter, he found a forgotten grocery list from weeks ago. Most of the items were crossed out, but one remained, coffee pods. He laughed softly. Forgot those, he said. Of course. He opened a cabinet and found a spare box he didn't remember buying. Maybe I didn't, he added. Little gaps, small things, nothing dramatic, but they were there. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, and let his thoughts settle into something more grounded. I'm not angry with her, he said again. That part hadn't changed. What had changed was the question underneath it. Do I feel seen? The answer didn't come immediately, and that, more than anything, told him this wasn't just about one wrong date. Carol finally stood, the quiet pushing her into motion. She began taking down the decorations, not out of obligation, but because she couldn't sit still anymore. Each string of lights, each plate, each leftover trace of the evening came down more slowly than it had gone up. When she reached the cake, she paused. Her fingers hovered over the icing, over his name. Ryan. She traced the first letter lightly. I do see you, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I don't know when I stopped paying attention enough to show it. The admission settled into the room, unanswered. For the first time since he walked out, she didn't reach for her phone. Instead, she stood there, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had gone wrong, and let the silence sit with her, not as punishment, but as something she might need to understand. Somewhere across town, Ryan stood in his own kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't started brewing yet. Neither of them slept easily that night, and neither of them pretended, anymore, that nothing had changed. Chapter 3. Misplaced Memories. Carol woke to a silence that didn't belong to morning. It was too complete. No low hum of Ryan moving around the kitchen. No soft clink of a coffee mug being set down too firmly because he hadn't quite woken up yet. No quiet morning spoken halfway between a yawn and a smile. Just stillness. She stared at the ceiling, disoriented for a moment, as though her body were waiting for a sound that refused to arrive. Then it came back to her. The party. The conversation. The door closing. "Oh," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. She turned onto her side, her hand instinctively reaching for the space beside her. Cold. And used. She closed her eyes again, but sleep had already left her hours ago without asking permission. What remained was a restless alertness, the kind that made every thought louder and every realization harder to ignore. After a few minutes of lying still, she reached for her phone. Nothing new. No messages. No missed calls. The absence felt deliberate even if she knew, logically, that it wasn't meant to punish her. Ryan wasn't that kind of person, which somehow made it worse. "He's thinking," she murmured. Ryan didn't rush into things, not decisions, not arguments, not apologies. When he needed space, he used it carefully, like someone measuring distance rather than creating it. Carol sat up abruptly. "I don't want him thinking alone," she said, the words sounding fragile the moment they left her mouth. But she didn't call again. Instead, she got out of bed and moved through her morning slowly, almost cautiously, as though the apartment might respond to sudden movements. The kitchen still held traces of last night, the faint scent of sugar and wine, a dish she hadn't put away properly, a towel draped over the edge of the sink. She picked it up and folded it neatly, her hands moving automatically while her mind stayed somewhere else entirely. "How do you forget something like that?" she asked the empty room. There wasn't an answer. There hadn't been one last night either. She leaned against the counter and closed her eyes, trying to force her thoughts into something linear, something she could follow. "Okay," she said. "Start with what I know." She knew Ryan's birthday. Not vaguely. Not approximately. Exactly. October. She had celebrated it with him before. Bought gifts. Planned dinners. Remembered little details that had made him smile. Last year, she had found that obscure restaurant he mentioned once in passing, just to surprise him. He had looked at her like she'd handed him something far more important than a meal. "You remember stuff," he'd said then, half laughing. She had. So what changed? Her mind jumped, not backward, but forward. Late nights. Deadlines. Her current project, which had begun as a challenge and quickly grown into something all-consuming. The kind of work that demanded attention not just during office hours, but in every quiet moment in between. She opened her laptop almost reflexively and pulled up her recent work files. Folders layered over folders. Drafts, revisions, edits. Messages marked urgent, then resolved, then followed up again. She clicked into her notes, pages of bullet points and half-formed ideas, timestamps creeping later and later into the night. 1:13 a.m., 2:07 a.m., 2:52 a.m. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. "I was here," she said, "not physically, but mentally, constantly. Even when she wasn't working, she had been thinking about work, preparing, fixing, anticipating." Her gaze drifted to the edge of the screen where a small reminder blinked faintly. "Call Ryan, postponed." She clicked into it. The original date was from 2 weeks ago. The updated reminder had no date attached. Carol swallowed. "Postponed," she repeated. "Not cancelled. Just delayed. Indefinitely." She closed the laptop and pressed both hands over her face, exhaling slowly. "This isn't about one date," she admitted. The birthday wasn't the cause. It was the symptom. Later that morning, Carol found herself sitting across from her friend Jenna in a small cafe they both frequented. Jenna stirred her coffee idly, watching Carol with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Okay," Jenna said. "Start from the top. But maybe slower this time." Carol nodded, wrapping both hands around her cup even though she hadn't taken a sip yet. "I threw Ryan a surprise birthday party," she began. "So far, great start." "It wasn't his birthday." Jenna blinked once. "I'm sorry, what?" "It is," Carol said, then faltered. "Just not yesterday." Jenna leaned back slightly, processing. "How far off were we talking?" Carol hesitated. 3 months. Jenna set her spoon down carefully. "Okay," she said. "That's ambitious." Carol let out a weak laugh, then shook her head. "I don't understand how it happened." Jenna studied her for a moment before asking, "Have you been sleeping?" "Not really. Eating. Sometimes. Thinking about anything that isn't work?" Carol opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Jenna nodded once, as though she just confirmed something important. "Carol, I'm going to say something, and I need you not to get defensive. That's never a good introduction." "Probably not," Jenna admitted. "But here we are." Carol gestured lightly. "Go ahead." "I don't think you forgot his birthday," Jenna said. "I think you stopped keeping track of anything that wasn't directly in front of you." Carol frowned. "That's not the same thing." "No," Jenna agreed. "It's worse." The words landed heavier than Carol expected. "Worse?" she repeated. "Yeah." Jenna said simply. Forgetting a date is a mistake. Losing track of the person attached to it? That's something else. Carol looked down at her cup. I didn't lose track of him, she said quietly. Jenna didn't respond immediately, and that silence stretched just long enough for Carol to feel it fully. When's the last time you asked him how he was doing? Jenna asked gently. Carol blinked. I talk to him every day. That's not what I asked. Carol searched her memory, suddenly aware of how slippery it felt. Conversations blurred together, small talk, updates, logistics. What do you want for dinner? I'll be late tonight. Did you feed the plant? Sorry, I've got to take this. I don't know, she admitted. Jenna's expression softened. That doesn't make you a bad person, she said. It just means you've been somewhere else for a while. Carol rubbed her hands together, as if trying to warm them. He said I stopped seeing him. Jenna tilted her head. Do you think you did? Carol didn't answer right away. Instead, her mind returned to last night, to Ryan standing in the doorway, calm but distant in a way she had never seen before. I think, she began, then hesitated. Jenna waited. I think I assumed he'd still be there, Carol finished. Jenna nodded slowly. And he probably will be, she said. But not in the same way if he keeps feeling invisible. Carol winced at the word. Invisible. That's not what I want, she said quickly. I know, Jenna replied. But intention and attention aren't the same thing. Carol sat with that. Intention had never been her problem. She had intended to show up, to care, to build something lasting. But attention, that was something else entirely. Later that afternoon, Carol stood back in her apartment, holding Ryan's mug in her hands. It wasn't anything special, just a plain ceramic cup with a small chip near the handle, but it had become his through repetition, through use, through presence. She turned it slowly, her thumb brushing over the chipped edge. I didn't stop loving you, she said softly, as if he might hear it somehow. The words felt true, but incomplete, because love, she was realizing, wasn't just something you felt. It was something you showed, repeatedly, consistently. Somewhere along the way, she murmured, I stopped showing it in ways that mattered. She set the mug down carefully on the counter. Her phone sat nearby, quiet but no longer avoided. She picked it up, her fingers steady this time. For a moment, she just looked at Ryan's name on the screen. Not as a contact, not as a notification, but as a person she knew she had taken for granted in ways she hadn't meant to. Then she typed, Carol, I think I understand what you meant. Not completely, but more than I did last night. She paused, then added, you're not an afterthought to me, but I haven't been acting like that, and I can see how that would hurt you. Another pause. I'm not asking you to answer right away. I just needed to say that. She read it once, then sent it. The message left her phone quietly, without ceremony. For the first time since the party, she didn't feel the urge to fill the silence immediately afterward. She set the phone down, inhaled slowly, and let the quiet remain. Not as something to escape, but as something to listen to. Because somewhere within it, there were answers she hadn't been hearing until now. Chapter 4. Alone on purpose, Ryan woke earlier than he needed to. Not because of an alarm and not because of noise. The apartment remained as quiet as it had been when he fell asleep. Uninterrupted, undemanding, indifferent. He lay still for a moment, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as the morning light filtered in through the blinds. The lines of shadow stretched across the room in neat, parallel rows, more orderly than his thoughts. Well, he said softly, voice rough from sleep, this is new. It wasn't really. He had woken up here thousands of times before. But not like this. Not after choosing to leave somewhere else. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat there, elbows resting loosely on his knees. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark but newly weighted with possibility. He hadn't checked it since late last night. Not because he didn't want to know. Because he wanted to wake up first without immediately stepping back into the conversation. 5 minutes, he told himself. Just be here for 5 minutes. He stood, stretching slightly, and walked toward the kitchen. The floor felt cooler than he remembered, or maybe he had just grown used to the softer warmth of Carol's rugs. That thought hovered for a second, then passed. He filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and leaned against the counter as it heated. No rushing, no multitasking, no background hum of someone else moving through the space. Just him. Okay, he said. This is fine. The kettle clicked. He made his coffee slowly, deliberately measuring each step as if reacquainting himself with a routine he hadn't practiced in a while. When he finally picked up his mug, he paused. It wasn't his mug. It was one he had bought years ago, plain and slightly too heavy, with a design he hadn't thought about since the day he carried it home. He turned it in his hand, studying it like it had recently changed shape. You're not the one I've been using, he said. The observation wasn't sad. It was factual, and maybe a little surprising. He took a sip, then let out a quiet breath. Still works, he added. He carried the mug into the living room and sat on the couch, finally reaching for his phone. One message. From Carol. He opened it. I think I understand what you meant. Not completely, but more than I did last night. You're not an afterthought to me. But I haven't been acting like that, and I can see how that would hurt you. I'm not asking you to answer right away. I just needed to say that. Ryan read it once, then again, then set the phone down on his knee without responding. Okay, he said. There was no immediate rush of relief, no wave of resolution, but there was something steady in her words, something that felt less like a reaction and more like a realization. She didn't defend it, he murmured. She didn't explain it away. That mattered. He leaned back against the couch, letting his head rest there as he stared at the ceiling again. She gets it, he added, at least more than before. But understanding something and changing it weren't the same thing. He knew that better than most. By mid-morning, Ryan found himself doing something he hadn't done in weeks. Cleaning. Not because the apartment was particularly messy, though it had its moments, but because the act itself felt grounding. He sorted through the stack of mail on the table, tossing what he didn't need and opening what he'd ignored. He folded the clothes on the chair instead of moving them to another surface. He wiped down the counters, reorganized the fridge, even adjusted the position of a lamp for no reason other than the angle feeling slightly better. At one point, he stepped back, hands on his hips, surveying the space. There you are, he said. It looked like his apartment again. Not just a place he used occasionally, but a space that reflected him, his routines, his preferences, his presence. He hadn't realized how much of that he'd let go. Not intentionally. Never with the thought, I'll move out slowly. It had just happened. He walked over to the bookshelf and ran a finger along the spines, pulling one out at random. A novel he had started last year and never finished. He flipped it open and noticed the bookmark. A receipt from a coffee shop he vaguely remembered visiting with Carol. He smiled slightly. I remember this, he said. She had ordered something complicated that took longer than expected, and he had joked about the barista needing a translator. You always do this, she'd said, laughing. You make everything sound more dramatic than it is. And yet, he had replied, I'm never wrong. He closed the book gently. That wasn't that long ago, he murmured, but it felt different. Not distant exactly, just slightly out of alignment with the version of them from the past few months. He placed the book back on the shelf. Later that afternoon, Ryan grabbed groceries. Nothing elaborate, just a few basics he'd let run out. Bread, eggs, coffee, actual coffee this time, and a couple of things he liked but hadn't bought in a while because they weren't Carol's favorites. As he moved through the aisles, he noticed the small decisions more clearly. I get this, he thought, picking up a brand he hadn't chosen recently. Not the other one. Not because hers was wrong, just because this one was his. At the checkout, the cashier scanned his items and glanced at him briefly. Paper or plastic? She asked. Paper, he replied. She nodded and began bagging. He waited, then added, almost absent-mindedly, thanks. The interaction was simple, routine. But as he walked out with the bag in his hand, he noticed something unexpected. Relief. Not the kind that comes from solving a problem, but the kind that comes from clarity. I forgot what I look like by myself, he said. It wasn't a criticism. It was an acknowledgement. In the last year, he had defined a lot of his daily life in relation to Carol, what worked for them, what made things easier, what fit into the shared rhythm they had built. And none of that had been wrong. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped checking whether it still felt balanced. Back at the apartment, he unpacked the groceries, placing everything neatly in its place. The act felt complete. He leaned against the counter again, the same spot as that morning, and took out his phone. Carol's message was still open, still waiting. He typed slowly. Ryan, I appreciate you saying that. He paused, considering his next words more carefully than usual. I think I'm still figuring out what I need to feel. Steady again. He stared at the sentence for a moment, then continued. I'm not trying to pull away. I just don't want to go back to how things felt before without understanding why they got there. He read it over once, then added, I'm here, just taking a step back for a bit. He sent the message and set the phone down. No dramatic release followed. No immediate sense of resolution. But something had shifted. Not away from her. Not entirely. Just slightly outward. Giving both of them space to see more clearly. That evening, Ryan sat on the floor with his back against the couch, the unfinished book open in his hands. He read a few pages, then paused, his eyes drifting over the words without fully taking them in. Instead, his mind circled something quieter. She didn't forget me, he said. He believed that. Not really, but forgetting the details that grounded a person. Dates, conversations, small pieces of consistency. That was something else, and he couldn't pretend it hadn't affected him. I want to feel chosen, he admitted aloud. Not once, not occasionally, but continuously in small, consistent ways that built into something steady. He closed the book, resting it on his knee. And I should feel like that too, he added, turning the thought inward. Because if he wanted to be seen, he had to be present in his own life as well. Not just absorbed into someone else's. Ryan leaned his head back against the couch and let out a slow breath. Okay, he said. This is where we start. Not with a decision, Not with a conclusion, but with something simpler, clarity, and for the first time since the party, that felt like movement in the right direction. Chapter 5, Conversations That Count. Ryan arrived 10 minutes early. He told himself it was because of traffic patterns and the unpredictability of Saturday afternoons. But as he sat in his car outside the cafe, engine off and hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, he knew the truth was simpler. He wanted a buffer, not to run away, just to arrive without rushing. The cafe was one they had passed dozens of times but never actually gone into. Neutral, unclaimed. A place without shared history, which felt important now in a way it hadn't before. Good choice, he murmured. His phone buzzed lightly. Carol, I'm here. He let out a slow breath, stepped out of the car, and headed inside. Carol spotted him immediately. She had chosen a small table near the window, more out of instinct than intention, but the natural light gave her something to focus on other than the tension gathering at the edges of the moment. When Ryan walked in, she noticed two things at once. First, that he looked the same calm posture, same slight incline of his head as he scanned the room. And second, that something about him felt subtly reset. Not distant, just more contained. Their eyes met. He gave a small, polite smile. She returned it, though hers carried a faint uncertainty. Hi, he said as he reached the table. Hi, she replied. There was a brief hesitation, just long enough for both of them to notice it, before they sat down. I wasn't sure if you'd want coffee, Carol began, gesturing lightly toward the counter. So I didn't order anything for you. Ryan nodded. That's fine. I'll grab something. I can. It's okay, he said gently. I've got it. She nodded, folding her hands together on the table as she watched him walk away. The space he left behind felt larger than it should have. Ryan ordered simply, black coffee, and leaned against the counter for a moment as he waited. He could feel the conversation ahead of him, not like a single moment but like a long road that neither of them fully knew how to map. That's fine, he thought. We don't need all of it today. When his name was called, he took the cup and returned to the table, sitting across from Carol again. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Not awkwardly, just carefully. Finally, Carol exhaled lightly. Thank you for meeting me. Ryan nodded once. Of course. Another pause. Then she said, I'm not really sure where to start. He tilted his head slightly. You don't have to have it all figured out. I know, she said, then gave a small, self-conscious smile. I just usually like to. That sounds familiar, he replied, the hint of a smile touching his voice. The tension eased just a fraction. Carol leaned forward slightly. I read your message, she said, about needing to feel steady again. Ryan nodded. That makes sense, she continued. I don't think I realized how unsteady things had gotten. He considered that. I didn't fully realize it either, he admitted. Not until recently. Because of the party? She asked. He shook his head slightly. The party just made it obvious, he said. But it wasn't where it started. Carol looked down briefly, absorbing that. I've been thinking about that, she said. About when it changed. And? He prompted gently. She hesitated, then met his eyes again. I think I stopped paying attention in the ways that actually matter, she said. Ryan didn't interrupt. I kept thinking that intention was enough, she continued. That because I meant to show up for you, that counted the same as actually doing it. He nodded slowly. I get that, he said. I've done that too. Her expression softened, surprised. You have? Yeah, he replied. Maybe not in the same way, but I've definitely assumed things would just keep working without checking in on them. She absorbed that, the idea settling between them as something shared rather than divided. I don't think I meant for anything to drift, she said quietly. I know, Ryan replied. The simplicity of his response made her blink. You do? She asked. Yeah, he said. I don't think any of this was intentional. He paused, then added, that doesn't make it not real though. She nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around each other. I know, she said. The words came easier now, not because the situation had changed, but because they were actually sitting in it together instead of reacting from opposite sides. Ryan took a sip of his coffee, then set it down carefully. I think the hardest part for me, he began, was realizing I didn't know when it started feeling different. Carol listened, her attention fully anchored to him. Like, I could point to moments, he continued. Late nights, missed conversations, stuff like that. But none of it felt big enough on its own to say something was wrong. That's how it felt for me too, she said quickly. Just small things. Yeah, he agreed. But they add up. She nodded. They do. Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt less like hesitation and more like space. Room to think, to process, to be honest without rushing. Carol broke it first. When you said you needed to know, you weren't just convenient, she said, her voice careful. That stayed with me. Ryan's expression softened slightly. Yeah, he said. I didn't realize I was making you feel that way, she admitted. I don't think you realized a lot of it, he replied, not unkindly. She let out a small breath. That seems to be a pattern. A faint smile touched his lips. It happens, he said. She studied him for a moment. You don't sound angry, she said. I'm not, he answered. Not even a little? He considered that. I was, he said. For about 5 minutes, maybe 10. She blinked. That's it. Yeah, he said. After that, it was more just trying to figure out what it meant. Carol leaned back slightly, absorbing that. I think I was more panicked than anything, she admitted. Not just about the mistake, but about what it said about me. Ryan nodded. That makes sense. She looked at him, searching. Do you think it says something bad about me? The question hung there, more vulnerable than anything she had said so far. Ryan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, taking a moment to consider, not to soften the truth, but to make sure what he said was honest. I think it says you've been stretched too thin, he said finally. Carol blinked, surprised. And I think, he continued, you didn't notice what you were losing focus on while that was happening. She sat with that, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. That feels fair, she said. But, Ryan added gently, it also says something about what happens next. She looked up. What do you mean? It's not just about understanding it, he said. It's about whether anything actually changes because of it. Carol nodded slowly. I want it too, she said. I know, he replied. I do too. Another pause. This one carried something different. Less uncertainty, more possibility. Carol leaned forward again, her tone more grounded now. Maybe we don't try to fix everything at once, she said. Maybe we just start paying attention again. On purpose. Ryan's brow lifted slightly. On purpose, he repeated. Yeah, she said. Not just assuming we're okay because we've been okay before. A small smile formed at the corner of his mouth. I like that, he said. Really? Yeah, he replied. It sounds realistic. She smiled faintly, relief flickering through her expression. Good. He tapped his fingers lightly against his coffee cup, then said, I think I need to keep some space for a bit. Her smile faded slightly, but she didn't look surprised. Okay, she said. Not to pull away, he clarified. Just to stay clear about what I'm feeling while we figure this out. She nodded. I understand. And we still see each other, he added. Just more intentionally. Like actual dates? She asked, a hint of humor slipping through. Like actual dates, he confirmed. She let out a small laugh. Wow, she said. Revolutionary. Groundbreaking, he agreed. The humor lingered, soft but welcome. For the first time since they'd sat down, the tension between them eased into something warmer. Not fixed, not resolved, but moving. Carol glanced at him, her expression steady. I don't want to just go back to how things were, she said. Me neither, Ryan replied. Good, she said. He nodded once. Good. They sat there a moment longer, neither rushing to leave. Because for the first time in days, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like something they were building through, rather than around. And that, more than anything they had said, felt like progress. Chapter 6. Learning each other again. Their first intentional date felt slightly like a first date. Ryan noticed it the moment he arrived. Carol had chosen a small outdoor spot this time. A quiet restaurant with string lights overhead and just enough background noise to keep their conversation from feeling exposed. It wasn't overly romantic, and it wasn't casual either. It sat somewhere in between, which felt appropriate. He spotted her at the table, already seated, hands wrapped loosely around a glass of water. She looked up as he approached, and for a brief second, there was that familiar brightness in her expression. Hey, she said. Hey, he replied, taking the seat across from her. There was a pause. Not awkward, just aware. Ryan smiled slightly. So, do we shake hands, or? Carol laughed, the tension breaking just enough to feel human again. Don't you dare shake my hand, she said. Noted, he replied. That narrows down my options. She shook her head, smiling. Hi, she said again, softer this time. Hi, he echoed. They both exhaled at nearly the same moment. The waiter came, menus were opened, and decisions were made. Simple ones, easy ones, the kind that didn't carry emotional weight. For the first few minutes, they drifted through familiar territory. How was your week? Busy. Yeah, same. But there was something different beneath it. They didn't stay there. Carol set her menu down and leaned forward slightly. I've been trying something, she said. Ryan raised an eyebrow. That sounds like it could go in a lot of directions. Focus, she replied lightly. Just actually paying attention to what's in front of me. Okay, he said, nodding. I remember that concept vaguely. She smiled, then grew more thoughtful. I realized how much I was operating on autopilot, she said, even when I thought I was being present. Ryan listened, not interrupting. I've been slowing things down, she continued, not just at work, but with everything. Conversations, decisions, even just noticing things. He tilted his head slightly. Noticing things like? Carol glanced around briefly, then back at him. Like the fact that you always sit with your left hand closer to your glass than your right, she said. Ryan blinked, then instinctively looked down at his hands. They were exactly where she said they were. Huh, he said, shifting them slightly. That's accurate. She smiled faintly. I didn't used to notice stuff like that. You noticed some things, he said. Not enough, she replied gently. He studied her for a moment, taking in the difference, not just in what she was saying, but in how she was saying it. More grounded, less rushed. I can see that, he said. Her shoulders relaxed slightly at that. Good, she said. Their food arrived, and with it came another natural shift in rhythm. They ate, talked, paused, and picked back up again, not forcing the conversation forward, but letting it move as it wanted to. At one point, Ryan set his fork down and said, I've been noticing things too. Carol looked up. Oh yeah, he said. Mostly about myself. She smiled. That sounds dangerous. It is, he replied. Would not recommend diving in without snacks. She laughed softly, then leaned in slightly. What did you notice? He considered how to phrase it. I realized how much I had adjusted without thinking about it, he said. Not in a bad way, just quietly. Carol listened closely. I got used to your routines, he continued. Your space, your schedule. And I think I stopped checking in with what I needed, because everything felt like it was moving in the right direction. She nodded slowly. But when things started feeling off, he added, I didn't know how to identify it, because I hadn't been paying attention to the smaller changes either. Carol sat back slightly, absorbing that. So we both stopped paying attention, she said. Yeah, he replied, just in different ways. She smiled faintly. That's strangely comforting, right? He said. At least it's consistent. She laughed again, more easily this time. As the evening went on, something subtle began to shift. Not dramatically, but noticeably. They started asking different kinds of questions. Not just updates or logistics, but things that required actual thought. What's been stressing you out lately? Ryan asked at one point. Carol paused before answering. My own expectations, she said finally. I kept thinking I had to prove something at work, and I let that bleed into everything else. He nodded. Do you still feel that way? Less, she said. Or at least, I'm more aware of it now. Good, he replied. And you? She asked. What's been on your mind? Ryan leaned back slightly, considering. I think I've been asking myself what chosen actually looks like, he said. Carol stilled. And? She asked quietly. He met her eyes. It looks like consistency, he said. Not big gestures. Not one perfect moment. Just showing up in ways that don't require guessing. She nodded, her expression softening. I can do that, she said. I believe you, he replied. The words weren't automatic. They carried weight. After dinner, they decided to walk. The night air was cooler than expected, and the soft glow of the streetlights gave the moment an almost suspended quality, like the world had slowed down just enough to let them catch up. They walked side by side, not quite touching, but closer than they had been when they started the evening. At one point, Carol glanced over at him. Can I ask you something slightly uncomfortable? She said. Ryan smiled faintly. That's becoming a theme, so go for it. She hesitated, then said, when you left the other night, did you think we were going to be over? Ryan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched his steps for a few seconds before looking back at her. No, he said finally. Her shoulders dropped, a hint of relief passing through her. But, he added, I did think that if we didn't address it, we might just drift into that without realizing it. She nodded. That makes sense, she said. He glanced at her. Did you? He asked. Think we were over? She shook her head lightly. No, she said. But I thought I might have broken something I didn't know how to fix. Ryan considered that. Maybe you did, he said. Her expression tightened slightly. But we're fixing it differently now, he continued. Not by pretending it didn't happen. She let out a breath, some of the tension leaving her. That's true, she said. They walked a few more steps in comfortable silence. Then, almost without thinking, Carol reached out and lightly brushed her hand against his. He looked down briefly, then back at her. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Their fingers intertwined. Not out of habit, but as a choice. By the time they reached the end of the block, Ryan slowed slightly. This feels better, he said. Carol nodded. It does, she agreed. Not perfect, not easy, but better, and more importantly, real. They stood there for a moment, hands still linked, both aware of the shift that had taken place over the course of a single evening. Not a resolution, not a conclusion, but a reintroduction to each other. Same time next week? Ryan asked, a hint of humor in his voice. Carol smiled. Actual date? She said. Actual date, he confirmed. She nodded. Then yes, she said. Same time next week. And as they parted for the night, there was something quietly reassuring in the way neither of them rushed ahead. They didn't need to. For the first time in a while, they were exactly where they meant to be. and they were paying attention to it. Chapter 7. The right question, wrong time, again. Ryan had never overthought anything quite as thoroughly as a small velvet ring box. He sat at his kitchen table, the unopened box resting in front of him like it had opinions about his life choices. It was unassuming, dark, square, quiet, the kind of object that didn't announce its importance, but carried it anyway. This is normal, he said to himself. People do this all the time. He tapped the box lightly with his finger. Not casually, though. No one casually buys one of these. He had already opened it once. He didn't need to do it again. The ring inside was exactly what he had chosen, a design that felt like Carol. Simple, elegant, not overly ornate, but thoughtful enough that you noticed it when you looked closely. He picked it up anyway. Just confirming, he muttered. The hinge clicked open. The ring caught the light from the window, subtle but steady. Ryan exhaled slowly. This is happening, he said, not as a question, as a realization. 2 weeks had passed since their first intentional date, and in those 2 weeks, something had quietly, steadily shifted. They had kept their promise, actual dates, planned with intention, not just convenience. Dinner one night, a walk through a park the next. Coffee in the middle of a Saturday afternoon where neither of them checked their phones once. No grand declarations. No rushed conversations. Just presence. Consistency. Ryan had started to notice it not as effort, but as rhythm. Carol followed through on what she said she would do. She listened differently, less distracted, more engaged. She asked questions and stayed for the answers. And more importantly, she noticed things. Small things. The way he preferred sitting on the edge before fully committing to the back of a chair. The fact that he always checked his pockets twice before leaving somewhere. That he stirred his coffee even when nothing needed stirring. You're predictable, she had teased during their third date. I like to think of it as consistent, he had replied. Same thing, she said. Different branding, he countered. She had laughed, and it had felt easy again. Not like before. Better than before. Because now it wasn't assumed. It was chosen. Ryan closed the ring box and leaned back in his chair. So now what? He asked the empty apartment. The question felt bigger than the object in front of him. Because timing, as he had recently learned, mattered. A lot. He stood, pacing once across the small space, then back again. I don't want to rush this, he said. But I also don't want to wait just because I'm afraid of doing it wrong. His phone buzzed. He picked it up instinctively. Carol. Running a little late. Meeting went longer than expected. Still on for tonight? Ryan smiled faintly. That message, even now, might have unsettled him a month ago. Late again. Work again. But there was something different in how she said it now. And in how she followed it. Another message appeared. I can reschedule if you'd rather. He typed back. Ryan, we're still on. Take your time. He paused, then added. I'll be there. She responded almost immediately. Thank you. He stared at the screen for a moment, then slipped his phone into his pocket. Yeah, he said. This is real. The plan had been simple. Dinner at a restaurant they hadn't tried yet, followed by a quiet walk along the river. No dramatic setup. No elaborate speech. Just a moment that felt natural. At least that had been the idea. By the time Ryan arrived at the restaurant, the plan had already begun to unravel, in small, almost comically inconvenient ways. First, the host glanced at his name and frowned. I'm sorry. I'm not seeing a reservation under that, she said. Ryan blinked. It should be there. I made it earlier this week. One moment, she replied, typing something into the screen. He waited, hands in his pockets, trying not to look like someone standing outside of his own plan. The host looked back up. Do you have it under a different name? He hesitated. No, he said. Just mine. She checked again, then offered an apologetic smile. It looks like there might have been an issue with the system, she said. We can still seat you, but it may be about a 20-minute wait. Ryan nodded slowly. Okay, he said. That's fine. He stepped aside, pulling out his phone. Great start, he muttered. Another buzz. Carol, leaving now. Ryan looked up briefly, then back at the message. All right, he said. We'll make it work. Carol arrived just as Ryan was finishing explaining the situation. No reservation? She said, eyebrows lifting in mild surprise. Apparently not, he replied. She smiled slightly. Bold strategy. I like to keep things unpredictable, he said dryly. Very on brand for you, she teased. He looked at her, then laughed. Okay, that's fair. The tension that might have existed dissolved almost immediately. Do you want to wait? She asked. Or we can go somewhere else. Ryan glanced at the host's stand, then back at her. Let's wait, he said. It's not that long. She nodded. They stood together near the entrance, shoulder to shoulder, watching people come and go. At one point, Carol nudged him lightly. You seem distracted, she said. Ryan exhaled. Yeah, he admitted. A little. She turned slightly to face him. Work distracted, or? He shook his head. No, not work. Okay, she said, then added gently. Do you want to talk about it? He hesitated. This wasn't how he had intended the moment to begin. Not standing beside a host stand. Not waiting for a table that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. This is not how people do this, he thought. But then another thought followed, quieter but more grounded. When has anything gone exactly how planned? He looked at her. Really looked. The way she waited, not pushing, but present. The way she was fully there, even in a small, inconvenient moment. And suddenly, the setting mattered less. Yeah, he said. Actually, I do. Carol's expression softened, curiosity and something deeper settling in her eyes. Okay, she said. Ryan reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the small box. He paused. Right now? He asked himself silently, then almost laughed at the question. Apparently, he answered. He pulled his hand back out, empty, for a moment reconsidering. Maybe not. Right here, he said instead, half to himself. Carol raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating with yourself? Constantly, he replied. She smiled. Should I be concerned? Probably, he said. But in a manageable way. She laughed softly. The tension broke just enough. A few minutes later, their table was ready. They were seated by a window, the low light giving the space a quiet intimacy that hadn't been there at the entrance. Ryan felt the shift immediately. This works, he thought. Menus were opened, then set aside. Orders placed. And then the moment returned. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. Hey, he said. Carol looked up. Hey, she replied. His expression was steady, but there was something focused in it now. Can I ask you something? He said. She smiled faintly. You don't usually ask permission anymore. Good sign, he replied. Means I'm learning. Go ahead, she said. He took a breath. Over the past few weeks, he began. We've been figuring things out again. She nodded. Yeah, she said. We have. And it's felt different, he continued. In a good way. It has, she agreed. He held her gaze. I don't want to lose that, he said. You won't, she replied softly. Not if we keep choosing it. He let that settle. Exactly, he said. His hand slipped into his pocket again, this time without hesitation. Carol noticed the movement, her eyes following subtly. Ryan, she began, her voice shifting slightly, anticipation creeping in. He paused, not from doubt, but from awareness. This is the moment, he thought. And for once it wasn't wrong. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't misplaced. It was exactly where it needed to be. He began to pull the small box out of his pocket. And for the second time in their relationship, timing, surprisingly, was finally on his side. Chapter 8. Choosing on purpose. For a brief moment, time narrowed. The low murmur of the restaurant faded into the background, conversations blending into an indistinct hum. The soft glow of candlelight flickered across the table, reflecting faintly off the glass of water between them. Carol didn't move. Neither did Ryan. He held the small velvet box in his hand now, resting it lightly against the edge of the table, not presenting it yet, just letting it exist between them. Carol's eyes dropped to it, then lifted back to his face. Ryan, she said quietly. There was no panic in her voice this time, no confusion, just awareness. He smiled slightly, the kind that carried both nervousness and certainty. Yeah, he said. It's me again. A small laugh slipped out of her before she could stop it. You, she said, shaking her head faintly, are remarkably consistent when it comes to surprising me. I'm working on the timing, he replied. Her gaze softened. I can tell. He exhaled slowly, leaning forward just a little more. I had this whole plan, he admitted. There was going to be a specific spot along the river, maybe something thoughtful, definitely something less, near a bread basket. She glanced at the basket, then back at him. It's a strong bread basket, she said. Very supportive setting. He laughed, the tension breaking just enough to let something steadier settle in. Good, he said. That's reassuring. For a second, neither spoke. And then Ryan's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to tell her this was the moment that mattered. I thought about waiting, he said, making sure everything was perfect. Carol watched him closely. But then I realized, that's not what we've been doing, he continued. We haven't been waiting for perfect. We've been choosing each other in small, real ways. She nodded slowly, her eyes already shining slightly. We have, she said. And it feels different, he added. Better. Because now I know it's not just happening. It's something we're both deciding, every day. Her fingers curled lightly against the edge of the table. I feel that too, she said. Ryan reached forward, placing his free hand over hers. She didn't hesitate. I told you I needed to feel chosen, he said. And over the last few weeks, I have. Carol's breath caught softly, emotion rising quickly now but not overwhelming. I meant it, she said. Every part of it. I know, he replied. He paused, just long enough to make sure what came next was exactly what he wanted to say. I don't think we're perfect, he said. I don't think we ever will be. A small smile touched her lips. That's probably a good thing, she said. Yeah, he agreed. Because perfect didn't teach us anything. He turned the velvet box slightly in his fingers. But this, he continued, this what we're building now, where we're paying attention, showing up, choosing each other on purpose. He met her eyes. That's real. Carol nodded, tears gathering now but not falling yet. It is, she whispered. Ryan opened the box. The soft click seemed louder than it should have, or maybe everything else had simply gotten quieter. The ring caught the warm light again, steady and understated. Carol let out a small breath, almost a laugh, almost a sob. You did not, she began, then stopped herself, covering her mouth briefly. He smiled. I did, he said. There was still a hint of humor in his expression, but now it was grounded in something deeper. Carol Anders, he said, his voice steady. I don't want something that just works because it's easy. I want something that works because we're both fully in it. She nodded, tears slipping free now, but she didn't look away. I choose you, he said simply. The words didn't try to be elaborate. They didn't need to be. I choose you when things are great, he continued. I choose you when things are complicated. I choose you when we're figuring it out, and when we don't have the answers yet. Her hand tightened around his. And I want to keep choosing you, he said softly. For the rest of my life. He took a small breath. Will you marry me? For a moment, Carol didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she was taking it in, not just the question but everything behind it. The weeks they had just lived through, the honesty, the attention, the way this moment didn't feel like an escape into something bigger, but a continuation of something more intentional. She let out a shaky laugh through her tears. You're doing this at the restaurant, she said. Ryan smiled. I am. With the bread basket. Very supportive, he echoed. She shook her head, wiping at her eyes. This is, she started, then stopped, taking a breath. This is not how I thought this would happen. I know, he said. She looked at him fully now, her smile growing despite the tears. It's better, she said. His own expression softened, relief flickering through it. Good, he replied. She nodded once, firmly this time. Yes. The word came out clear and certain. Yes, I'll marry you. Ryan exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping him as the tension finally released. Okay, he said almost to himself. Okay. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady even as the moment carried more weight than anything he'd said or done before. Carol looked down at it, then back at him, her smile widening. Around them, the restaurant seemed to realize what had happened in small, delayed ways. Glances, smiles, a few soft claps starting from a nearby table and spreading outward. Carol let out another laugh, shaking her head. Of course this is happening in public, she said. It builds character, Ryan replied. It builds a crowd, she countered, glancing briefly at the people around them. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Or, he said, we could ignore all of that and just stay right here. Her expression softened again. Yeah, she said. Let's stay here. They didn't rush to stand. They didn't try to make it bigger than it already was. They just sat there, hands still linked, the ring catching the light between them. Not perfect, not planned exactly right, but completely, unmistakably intentional. And as Carol rested her head lightly against his shoulder, she smiled. Because for the first time in a long while, there was no question about whether they were choosing each other. They both were. On purpose. Every time.